The massive doors of the Galactic Sports Complex on Station Epsilon 7 towered over Sarah Chen as she waited in line for registration. Above her head, holographic displays showed previous champions of the Centennial Strength Games, towering creatures with multiple limbs, crystalline beings that could compress themselves to incredible densities, and entities that seemed to be made of pure energy. Not a single human among them. Sarah adjusted her Team Earth uniform and tried to ignore the curious stares from the other competitors. At 5'8" and 180 pounds, she looked almost childlike next to the hulking frames of most alien athletes. A Voldraxian warrior nearby, easily 12 feet tall with arms like tree trunks, let out what sounded like a snort of derision. Species, the registration official asked when Sarah reached the front of the line. The being appeared to be made of flowing mercury, its face rippling as it spoke. Human, Sarah replied clearly, holding out her credentials. Earth. The mercury-like being paused, its surface forming complex patterns that Sarah had learned indicated confusion. There must be an error. Humans are Class 3 Deathworlders. The games are restricted to Class 1 and Class 2 species for safety reasons. Sarah smiled, pulling up the official invitation on her holopad. Special dispensation from the Games Committee, approved last solar cycle. We petitioned for 3 years to prove humans could safely compete. The official surface rippled again, but it couldn't argue with the documentation. As it processed her registration, Sarah heard murmurs from the gathered crowd. Most were discussing her size, betting how quickly she'd wash out in the preliminaries. A few were concerned about her safety. None of them knew about the rigorous testing she'd undergone to get here. None of them understood what it meant to come from Earth, where gravity was a constant enemy, where atmospheric pressure crushed most visiting aliens, where the very air was corrosive to some species. They didn't know about the countless hours she'd spent in the gym, pushing beyond what even other humans thought possible. Registration complete, the official announced. You are assigned to Preliminary Group D. Please be advised that medical staff will be on standby during your events. Sarah nodded, keeping her expression neutral despite her amusement. She'd expected this kind of reaction, but it still felt surreal. As she moved toward the athletes' quarters, a deep voice called out behind her. Human. She turned to find herself face to chest with the Voldraxian warrior from earlier. Up close, his gray-scaled skin looked like armor plating, and his 4 arms rippled with muscle. I am Krax, 6-time regional champion. You should withdraw. This is not a place for fragile species. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Thanks for the concern, but I'll take my chances. Krax's upper set of arms crossed over his chest. You don't understand. The preliminaries alone have killed stronger beings than you. The gravity chamber will crush your bones. The endurance trials will tear your muscles apart. The strength tests. He shook his massive head. It would be unfortunate to witness your death. I appreciate the warning, Sarah replied, her voice firm but polite. But where I come from, we have a saying. Don't judge a book by its cover. She turned and walked away, leaving the confused Voldraxian to puzzle over the idiom. In her assigned quarters, Sarah began her pre-competition routine. As she went through her stretches, she couldn't help but smile at the irony. These aliens, with all their advanced technology and evolutionary advantages, had no idea what they were about to witness. They didn't understand that humans were the ultimate generalists. Not the strongest, not the fastest, but incredibly well-rounded and adaptable. The morning would bring the first events, the gravity chamber trials. Sarah had trained for months in simulated conditions, far worse than what the games could produce. Earth's gravity was already higher than most inhabited worlds, and she pushed herself well beyond that in preparation. As she prepared for bed, her communicator chirped with a message from her coach back on Earth. Show them what Deathworlders can do. Sarah grinned. Tomorrow, she wouldn't just compete. She would shatter every preconception these aliens had about human capabilities. They thought they were protecting her with their concerns and warnings. Soon, They'd learn why humans had earned their reputation as one of the most formidable species in the galaxy. After all, you don't survive on a death world by being fragile. The gravity chamber loomed before Sarah like a giant metallic egg, its surface gleaming under the harsh stadium lights. Around her, other competitors from Group D were completing their final preparations. Most were twice her size or larger, their bodies evolved for conditions she could barely imagine. "Attention competitors," the announcement echoed through the arena. "Group T gravity trials will commence in 5 minutes. Please approach your designated chambers." Sarah watched as Krax, the Voldraxian warrior, stepped into the chamber next to hers. He gave her one last concerned look before his door sealed. Across the arena, massive screens displayed the interior of each chamber, allowing spectators to watch every moment. "Begin KA duration," the system announced. Sarah felt the familiar pull as the gravity slowly increased. The chambers were calibrated to each species' homeworld gravity as a starting point. For her, that meant 1 Earth gravity, already higher than most competitors' baseline. The alien audience murmured as the numbers appeared on screen. Many had never seen Earth's specifications before. When they saw the humans considered 9.8 meters per second squared normal, the murmurs turned to gasps. Phase 1 initiating. Gravity increasing to 200% baseline. Sarah remained standing casually as the force doubled. Around her, the screen showed other competitors adjusting their stances, their bodies tensing against the increased pressure. At twice Earth gravity, she was experiencing forces that would cripple most beings. To her, it felt like wearing a heavy backpack. "Remarkable adaptation from the human competitor," one of the commentators noted. "Most species show visible strain at this point, but she appears. Is she yawning?" Sarah was, in fact, yawning. Not from boredom, but because she knew what was coming. She'd trained for this, pushing herself in Earth's most advanced gravity chambers until this level felt natural. Phase 2 initiating. Gravity increasing to 300% baseline. Now she felt it. Her muscles tensed automatically, years of training kicking in as she adjusted her posture. On the screens around her, competitors began to struggle. A crystalline being from the Rigel system cracked under the pressure, its surface splintering. Medical teams rushed to its chamber. The human remained standing. The commentator announced, disbelief evident in their voice. This is unprecedented for a Class 3 species." At 4 times Earth gravity, Sarah finally showed signs of effort. Sweat beaded on her forehead as her muscles worked against forces that would crush a car into scrap metal. But still, she stood. Krax, in the chamber beside her, was down on one knee. His mighty frame, the vault for a world with gravity far lower than Earth's, trembled under the pressure. Through the chamber wall, his eyes met Sarah's. The concern from earlier had been replaced by something new: respect. Final phase initiating. Gravity increasing to 500% baseline. This was it, the moment Sarah had trained for. As the crushing force pressed down on her, she remembered her coach's words during training. "Humans don't just adapt to pressure, we thrive on it." Her legs shook, her spine compressed. Every breath was a battle. But Sarah Chen, child of Earth, did not fall. One by one, the remaining competitors collapsed. Even Krax, with all his strength and pride, finally succumbed to the overwhelming force. But in Chamber 5, a small figure remained upright. When the trial ended, Sarah was the only one still standing. The silence in the arena was deafening. Thousands of alien spectators stared in disbelief at the screens, watching as she walked out of her chamber under her own power. Medical teams rushed to her, scanners whirring as they checked for internal injuries. They found none. What they did find shocked them even more. Her body was already adapting, her bones and muscles responding to the stress by becoming stronger. "Impossible," one of the medical officers muttered, their tentacles waving in agitation. "Your species, you shouldn't be able to." "We're full of surprises," Sarah replied, accepting a hydration pack. That's what happens when you evolve on a world that's trying to kill you every day of your life. As she headed for the recovery area, she passed Cracks being helped out of his chamber. The massive warrior stopped his medical team, straightened to his full height despite his obvious pain, and did something that sent another wave of shock through the arena. He bowed to her. "I apologize for my earlier words, human," he rumbled. "I did not understand. Your people, you are not what you seem." Sarah smiled, returning the bow. "No, we're not. And this is just the beginning." In the spectator section, the games committee members huddled together, frantically reviewing their rulebooks. They had expected the human to fail early, to prove that Class 3 species didn't belong in the games. Instead, they were facing a new reality. They had severely underestimated what it meant to come from a death world. As Sarah prepared for the next event, messages began pouring in from Earth. Videos of her performance had already gone viral across the galaxy. Humans everywhere were celebrating, but they weren't surprised. They knew what Sarah was demonstrating, that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their muscles or bones, but in their ability to push beyond what anyone, including themselves, thought possible. The preliminary rounds weren't over yet. There would be tests of endurance, speed, and raw strength still to come. But Sarah had already accomplished something unprecedented. She had forced the galaxy to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about humans. And she was just getting warmed up. The recovery chamber hummed softly as Sarah reviewed footage of her next opponent. Sathul, the Chronaxian champion, dominated the holoscreen, a being that seemed to be made of living obsidian, with crystalline formations that shifted and realigned with every movement. For 15 cycles, no one had beaten them in the mental resilience trials. Studying hard. A melodic voice interrupted her concentration. Sarah turned to find Zura, a Luminarian competitor she befriended, floating nearby. The bioluminescent alien's patterns pulsed with concern. "Xathul breaks more than bodies, Sarah. They break minds." Sarah nodded, watching as the footage showed Xathul's previous opponent collapsing not from physical strain, but from sheer psychological pressure. The mental resilience trials were unique. Competitors had to maintain perfect form in their strength exercises, while their minds were subjected to increasingly intense psychological stress. "I heard they've already filed 3 protests about your continued participation," Zira mentioned, her lights dimming slightly. "The committee is in chaos. No one expected a human to make it this far." "Let them protest," Sarah replied, standing up from the recovery pod. "We humans have a saying. Pressure makes diamonds." The arena for the mental trials was smaller, more intimate. Each competitor would face their challenges in front of the others, adding another layer of psychological pressure. As Sarah took her place in the waiting area, she felt Xathul's crystalline gaze fix upon her. "The human who refuses to break," they said, their voice like grinding stones. "I have studied your species, so fragile, so brief. Your minds are chaos, ruled by chemicals and emotions." Their crystalline structure shifted, creating a sound like laughing glass. "This will be educational." Sarah met their gaze steadily. "We do tend to be educational." The first few competitors went quickly. The challenge seemed simple. Hold the weighted bar at arm's length while the mental probes did their work. One by one, they faltered as their deepest fears and doubts were dragged to the surface. Then it was Xathul's turn. The Chronaxian champion moved with liquid grace, lifting the weight as if it were nothing. The mental probes activated, and the arena grew silent. Everyone knew Xathul's reputation. They didn't just endure the mental assault. They seemed to enjoy it. For 10 minutes, Xathul held perfect form, their crystalline face showing only amusement as the probes intensified. When they finally set the weight down, it wasn't because they needed to. It was because they'd reached the maximum time limit. "Perfect score," the judges announced, to no one's surprise. "Human competitor Sarah Chen, please take your position." As Sarah approached the platform, She felt the weight of every alien gaze. The bar was adjusted to her size, though she noticed with amusement that they'd left it at Xathel's weight setting. Typical. She gripped the bar, lifted it to position, and nodded. Ready. The mental probes activated. The first wave was basic. General anxiety, uncertainty, fear. Sarah had expected this. What she hadn't expected was how familiar it felt. Like the pre-competition jitters she dealt with since her first weightlifting meet as a teenager. Response nominal, one of the technicians announced, sounding surprise. Increasing to level 2. The second wave brought specific fears, memories of injuries, of failures, of moments when she doubted herself. Sarah's arms trembled slightly, but her grip remained firm. In her mind, she heard her coach's voice. Pain is just weakness leaving the body. Remarkable, someone muttered. Increasing to level 3. Now came the existential fears, the deep primal terrors that every sentient being carried. Fear of death, of insignificance, of cosmic loneliness. The probes dug deeper, trying to find her breaking point. What they found instead was something uniquely human, the ability to face fear and keep going anyway. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Sarah's arms burned, her muscles screamed for relief, but she held firm. The mental probes pushed harder, becoming desperate to find some crack in her defenses. How? Xathel's voice cut through her concentration. Your kind are ruled by fear. You live on a death world. Everything about your evolution should make you susceptible to this. Sarah managed a small smile, even as sweat dripped down her face. That's where you're wrong, she gasped. We don't survive despite our fears. We survive because of them. Fear taught us caution. Pain taught us limits. Doubt taught us to prepare. Every negative emotion you're trying to use against me. She adjusted her grip slightly. Those are the things that made humanity strong. The probes hit their maximum intensity. Sarah's vision blurred, her mind filled with every terrifying possibility the system could generate. But she didn't break. She couldn't break. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about showing the galaxy what humans were really made of. When the time limit buzzer finally sounded, Sarah carefully lowered the bar. Her arms shook from exhaustion, but her mind was clear. The silence in the arena was absolute. Perfect score, the judges announced, their voices carrying a mix of disbelief and awe. Xathel stood perfectly still, their crystalline structure completely rigid. For the first time in 15 cycles, someone had matched their performance. And not just anyone. A human, a species they had dismissed as mentally weak. As Sarah walked past them toward the recovery area, she heard their crystalline voice. Quieter now. Perhaps, we have more to learn about your kind. Zira fell into step beside her, her bioluminescence pulsing with excitement. How did you do it? The fears, the doubts. Those aren't our weaknesses, Sarah explained, accepting a hydration pack. There are teachers. Humans don't overcome fear. We learn from it. We use it. Every negative emotion they threw at me. I felt worse just trying to parallel park in Shanghai. The joke was lost on Zira, but the message wasn't. As news of Sarah's performance spread through the station, the alien community began to understand something profound about humans. Their psychological resilience wasn't about being fearless or emotionless. It was about feeling everything, acknowledging it, and moving forward anyway. The finals were approaching, and Sarah had proven that humans could match the galaxy's best in both body and mind. But Xathel wasn't finished yet, and the hardest challenges were still to come. The finals arena resembled a massive obstacle course, but one designed by beings who had very different ideas about what constituted a challenge. Floating platforms shifted in seemingly random patterns, gravity fields fluctuated wildly, and sections of the course were filled with environments hostile to most forms of life. Sarah stood at the starting line alongside the 3 other finalists. Xathel, whose crystalline form reflected the arena's lights like a dark mirror, Krax, who had fought his way back through the secondary brackets, and Velon, a gaseous entity that could alter its density at will. "The final challenge," announced the chief judge, their voice resonating through the arena, "tests not just individual attributes, but the total capacity of a species. Strength, speed, endurance, adaptability. All must be demonstrated to achieve victory." Sarah rolled her shoulders, feeling the familiar pre-competition tension. The other finalists towered over her, each specialized for their particular forms of movement and combat. But being a generalist was humanity's specialty. First contestant, Velon of the Mist Worlds. The gaseous being flowed into the course like living smoke. They moved with incredible grace, passing through barriers that would stop solid matter, condensing to incredible density to activate pressure plates, expanding to cross wide gaps. But when they reached the gravity fluctuation zones, their control began to waver. Velon finished the course, but their time was far from optimal. Krax went next, his 4 arms and incredible strength allowing him to power through obstacles that had stymied Velon. The Voldraxian warrior had learned from his earlier encounter with Sarah not to underestimate anyone, and his performance showed it. He moved with unexpected agility for his size, but the environmental hazard slowed him considerably. Then came Axothul. The Chronaxian champion approached the course with the same cold confidence they showed in everything. Their crystalline body shifted and reformed as needed, adapting to each challenge with practiced ease. When they finished, their time set a new record. Final contestant, Sarah Chen of Earth. As Sarah stepped up to the starting line, she heard murmurs from the crowd. Despite her previous performances, many still couldn't believe a human had made it this far. She smiled to herself, remembering all the training that had led to this moment. The signal sounded. Sarah moved. The first section was pure strength, lifting and moving massive objects while fighting varying gravity. She didn't try to match the raw power of beings like Krax. Instead, she used leverage and momentum, techniques perfected over thousands of years of human engineering and martial arts. "Extraordinary," one commentator noted. "The human is using the environment itself as a tool." The environmental hazards came next. Sections of extreme heat, cold, pressure, and atmospheric composition that would kill unprotected beings. Sarah's environment suit, a marvel of human engineering, adapted quickly. Where other competitors had to power through or avoid these zones, she moved through them with practiced ease. Their species evolved on a planet that experiences all these conditions naturally, another commentator explained. What we consider hostile environments, they call weather. But it was in the gravity fluctuation zones that Sarah truly shone. Humans, it turned out, had an unexpected advantage. Their inner ear gave them superior balance and spatial awareness. Where other competitors struggled with the changing forces, Sarah's body automatically adjusted, her movements fluid and precise. "Look at that adaptation rate." The first commentator was practically shouting now. "She's not just surviving the changes, she's using them." Sarah reached the final obstacle, a chamber where all environmental factors changed randomly and simultaneously. This was where Velon had struggled and Krax had barely maintained control. Even Axothul had shown signs of strain. She paused for a fraction of a second, analyzing the patterns. Then she did something that caused the entire arena to fall silent. She started dancing. Not literally dancing, but her movements had that same fluid quality. She flowed from one position to another, letting the changing forces guide her movement while maintaining perfect control. It was a technique she'd developed during training, inspired by human parkour athletes and martial artists who had learned to work with forces rather than against them. Is she enjoying this?" Someone in the crowd asked incredulously. She was. This was what humans did best, adapting, improvising, finding ways to turn hostile environments to their advantage. Every challenge in the course resembled something humans had already overcome on Earth, often multiple times and in worse conditions. Sarah crossed the finish line. The timer stopped. The arena erupted in chaos. She had beaten Saful's time by 17 seconds. As medical teams rushed to check her vital signs, again finding nothing wrong, Sarah caught sight of her competitor's reactions. Velon's gaseous form swirled in patterns that indicated deep thought. Krax was nodding, a warrior's acknowledgement of superior technique. And Xaful's crystalline surface showed something that looked almost like a smile. How? The medical officer checking her readings seemed baffled. Your species shouldn't be able to adapt this quickly to changing conditions. Sarah took a long drink from her water bottle before answering. On Earth, we have a saying, Jack of all trades, master of none. She paused, smiling. But people often forget the rest of that phrase. But better than a master of one. The implications of her performance were already sending shockwaves through the galactic community. Humans weren't just strong, or resilient, or adaptable. They were all of these things at once. What other species saw as weaknesses, their generalist nature, their constant need to adapt, their exposure to harsh conditions, were actually their greatest strengths. As Sarah prepared for the final event, she knew she had already achieved something remarkable. She had shown the galaxy that being a Deathworlder meant more than just surviving harsh conditions. It meant thriving in them, learning from them, and turning them into advantages. The championship round awaited, and with it, a chance to make history. The championship arena had been transformed for the final event. Gone were the elaborate obstacles and environmental chambers. Instead, a single circular platform dominated the center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the two finalists' achievements throughout the games. Sarah Chen versus Saful. Human versus Chronaxian. Deathworlder versus Champion. The crowd that packed the stadium was the largest in Centennial Games history. Species from across the galaxy had come to witness what many were already calling the most surprising competition in centuries. Among them, Sarah spotted several human observers who had made the long journey from Earth, including her old coach. The championship trial, the chief judge announced, is deceptively simple. 2 competitors, 1 platform. The last one standing wins. They paused for effect. But this is not merely a contest of strength. Each competitor must demonstrate why their species' approach to power is superior. Xaful stepped onto the platform first, their crystalline body catching the light dramatically. 15 cycles of victories had taught them how to command attention. They turned to Sarah, their faceted surface reflecting multiple distorted images of her. You have impressed many here, human, they said, their voice carrying across the arena. But impression is not victory. I have studied every movement you've made, every technique you've shown. I know how your species thinks, how you compensate for your limitations. Sarah stepped onto the platform, looking almost small next to the towering crystal being. But those who had watched her throughout the games noticed something different about her stance, a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with size or strength. That's interesting, she replied, loud enough for all to hear. Because while you were studying me, I was learning from you. That's what humans do best. The signal to begin echoed through the arena. Xaful moved first, their crystalline form shifting and hardening into weapon-like protrusions. It was a technique that had ended matches in seconds, but Sarah was already moving, not away from the attack, but toward it. Fascinating strategy from the human, the commentator noted. She's using Xaful's own momentum. Sarah slid under a crystalline arm, her movement more like a dance than a dodge. Every attack from Xaful was met not with direct opposition, but with redirection. She moved like water around stone, never meeting force with force unless absolutely necessary. You cannot evade forever. Xaful rumbled, their frustration showing in the increasingly chaotic patterns of their crystal structure. This is a contest of power. You're right, Sarah answered, ducking another swing. But you're wrong about what power is. She began to move differently, changing her patterns unpredictably. Where before she had been reactive, now she was proactive, creating situations that forced Xaful to adapt to her. "Look at this," the commentator exclaimed. "The human is combining techniques we've seen throughout the games. The balance control from the gravity trials, the psychological resilience from the mental challenges, the adaptability from the obstacle course." Zaful's attacks became more aggressive, but also more predictable. Their crystalline form, for all its strength and beauty, couldn't match the fluid adaptability of human movement. Every time they thought they had Sarah cornered, she found a way to turn their own power against them. "You want to know humanity's secret?" Sarah called out as she wove through another attack. "It's not that we're stronger, or faster, or tougher than everyone else. It's that we never stop learning, never stop adapting. Every failure teaches us. Every challenge changes us." She moved inside Zaful's guard, using a technique that combined human martial arts with what she learned from watching Krax's four-armed fighting style. The Chronaxian champion stumbled, their perfect balance disrupted for the first time in 15 cycles. "Impossible," Zaful growled, their crystalline surface showing fractal patterns of stress. "Your species, you are not specialized for this." "Exactly," Sarah's voice carried across the now silent arena. "We're not specialized for anything. And that's our strength. Humans don't excel at one thing. We get better at everything. We take what works from others, adapt it, improve it, share it. That's real power." The final exchange happened so quickly that many observers missed it. Sarah used everything she had learned about leverage, about Chronaxian crystal structures, about gravity and balance and momentum, in one perfectly timed movement. Zaful, for all their strength and experience, found themselves airborne, their crystalline form unable to compensate for the unexpected combination of techniques. They landed outside the platform. The arena erupted. Sarah stood alone in the center, breathing hard but upright. She had done what no one thought possible. A human had become champion of the Centennial Games. But it was what happened next that truly changed galactic history. Zaful rose, their crystalline form reforming, and approached the platform. Everyone expected the traditional acknowledgement of defeat. Instead, the Chronaxian champion did something unprecedented. They asked a question. "Will you teach me?" The arena fell silent again. Sarah smiled, extending her hand in the human gesture of friendship. "Only if you'll teach me too. That crystal reformation technique of yours is incredible." Zaful's surface rippled with what could only be described as laughter. "Perhaps that is the final lesson you have taught us all. True power lies not in being the strongest, but in being strong enough to learn from others." As the award ceremony began, the implications of what had happened began to spread through the galactic community. Humans hadn't just proven they could compete. They had demonstrated a completely different approach to advancement, one based not on individual superiority, but on constant learning, adaptation, and sharing of knowledge. The Games Committee made their announcement before the ceremony even ended. Humans would be reclassified, not as a higher or lower class, but as something new entirely. They were now designated as an adaptive species, one capable of learning and incorporating traits from all others. As Sarah stood on the winner's platform, her gold medal reflecting the arena lights, she thought about all the humans watching back on Earth. They had known all along what the rest of the galaxy was just discovering. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their muscles, or their bones, or even their minds. It was in their ability to look at the impossible and say, "Let's figure out how to do that." The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would the games.